the discipline of prayer and being in the Word is real. We have to do that. There's just no other way. Like I can walk into the gym, but if I don't get on the machines and lift the weights, I don't build muscle. So we have to do those disciplines, but we don't have to run around trying to open the doors to do the thing He's called us to do. I had no idea I was called to lead worship. I was on the worship team. I knew that something happened when I worshiped, both in myself and among those I was worshiping, but I had no vision of being a worship leader. That was August, and I went home and I said, Lord, there is no way. Our senior pastor was our worship leader. He was amazing. So it was August. I went home. I left it. I didn't do anything with it. March, our senior pastor comes to us and says he's moving to join another ministry. We knew it was God. They had to pick worship leaders, and I was tapped.
You know, one of my weaknesses over the years is that I use the word favorite way too much. My favorite Bible verse, my favorite book, my favorite food. And I try to use it a little less liberally than I used to, but I have to use it again today. I'm about to introduce you to one of my favorite authors of all time. Honestly, I've been reading her books for decades. And when I'm done with this episode, you're going to say, thank you, Carol. Thank you for talking to Rachel Hauck. She's an extraordinary woman, not just because she's a celebrated author, an award-winning, best-selling author of Christian fiction, but also because of her story, because of the way she has determined to serve the Lord no matter what life has thrown at her. You know, Rachel is the kind of girl that you're going to say, I wish I could be friends with her. I wish I could sit down and have a cup of coffee with Rachel Hauck. Well, you know what? You can as you listen to this episode of the Significant Women Podcast. Go fix yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, a glass of lemonade, and sit down and listen to this wonderful conversation. As you know, I'm Carol McLeod. I'm your host on the Significant Women Podcast. Every episode is filled with personal stories, sage women, joy that bubbles over, a hope that's uncontainable as discovered in the lives of the men and women that I interview. I know you're going to love today's episode. Well, I'm with a new friend today. We've just chatted for a couple minutes off mic, and I already know that, Rachel, if we lived in the same neighborhood, we would probably be besties.
We would be hanging out, for sure.
We would be. We've had a lot to talk about. So my guest today is Rachel Hauck. She's a author, a speaker, and she's been writing for over 30 years. And if you love Christian fiction, I know you've read some of her books, but we're not going to talk about her books yet. We're going to talk about Rachel and the life that she's lived. So Rachel, I want to take you back in time to when you were just a wee bit of a girl. When you were little, Rachel, what did you want to be when you grew up? Or some of your childhood dreams?
Oh, I absolutely wanted to be a writer. I don't know how, but I had a diary when I was in first grade. One of those little red diaries with the little clasp, and it had 3 entries on a page. And I would write in it. And I just remember this entry. I don't know how I remember this because I know how much our memories can get convoluted and fogged and melded together with other events and events that aren't even ours sometimes. But I remember I wrote in it that today we went to the store and I didn't know how to spell because. So I pulled out my trusty kindergarten thesaurus and said, for we needed food. So I said, today we went to the store for we needed food. And I just was always writing and logging things. And when I was in elementary school, I wrote a poem for a class project. And my teacher loved it. And my dad really loved it. And he started saying to me, Rachel, you're a writer, be a writer. And I think he also knew how much I was holed up in my room reading Laura Ingalls Wilder books or whatever book I brought home from the library. I always loved the little projects where you sold candy bars and you got to buy books at the end. I was always down for that. And still to this day, I love the smell of a print book. And so I just think it was always in me, so be a writer.
Yeah.
Tell a story.
When I hear your childhood story, I think we've lived the same life. I was
See?
in Western New York and you were other places, but oh my goodness. So you've already referred to a childhood book that you loved, the Little House books, which I did too. But when you were a little girl, what was your favorite childhood book? Now that you look back, what was the book that impacted you the most as a little girl?
I remember, I don't know who the author was. There was a book that we got through the school program called Plain Girl, and it was about an Amish girl
Yeah.
who went to school for the first time, a public school for the first time, and just kind of the differences in her reality to the kids, the public school, the city kids, the non-Amish kids' reality. That was kind of an impactful book. But I would probably say the Laura Ingalls Wilder books because I felt like I was her in the 20th century. So I thought, I'm going to
Yes.
write the 20th century Little House books. But, little did I know how actually difficult it was to write a children's book. And it's much easier to write an adult book than a children's book. But that really formulated me like how you can use your life to tell a story. And then there were a couple of books that I've looked for, but I can't find. I thought one of them was called True Blue, and they were young adult books about going to high school. And there were two girls that were best friends, and a new school had been built. And so one of them had to go to the new school. And so mid high school, too. So their friendship was broken apart, all their plans were broken apart. And I suppose in some ways, a little bit of that story inspired The Best Summer of Our Lives because I have four friends. They had a plan. They were going to go to college together. And the summer before they go to college, that gets blown apart. That was last year's book. But, I think all of those stories and even my life stories influenced me in writing. But I would just definitely say the Laura Ingalls Wilder stories impacted me the most as a child. And
Yeah, without a doubt. She just has impacted so many generations of little girls who grew up to be women. And we think about her all the time.
Oh, yeah,
And what
I
she
do.
went through. I do too.
I
do
want to
too,
know more
Rachel.
about her. Like, I want to know more details. I would love to do an interview with her, with Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you ever YouTubed, like on YouTube, there are several documentaries about her that are just fascinating. If you haven't watched those,
I haven't. I have
watch
some of
them
the.
about her daughter.
Oh, yeah. I have a book on her daughter, and I have some of the collections that people have made, but I've never looked on YouTube. I should do that. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome. Let me know how you like them.
I will.
But now, Rachel, let's talk about your faith journey. You were raised in a Christian home, but when did you embrace the Christian faith as your very own? Tell us about that journey in life.
Yeah. We were talking earlier that my dad went to ORU, Oral Roberts University,
Yeah.
in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the mid 60s. So I was a little girl. I was 5, I think, when we moved out there. And it was just still a brand new university. I was telling Carol that the prayer tower had just been built and the ground beneath it was still dirt. And my father was the youth pastor at a local Methodist church. And of course, I was in Sunday school. And all I remember is the teacher talking to us about Jesus. I can't remember her name or her face. She's just like this gray blob in my mind. But I can still see myself walking up the stairs into the main sanctuary after Sunday school and thinking in my heart, I've got to get Jesus in my heart. That's all. I walked out of that Sunday school class with conviction. And I'm 6 years old. And I said to my mom after church, how do I get Jesus in my heart? And she said, well, I think she told me. And then she says, when we go to church tonight, I don't know. I asked her later, I said, why'd you make me wait? And she goes, I don't know. We'll go down to the altar and pray. Because this is the 60s. Probably this was 67. Yeah. So some of the Jesus movement, some of the charismatic movement had been happening, which impacted my parents and our family. So I went to the altar and I begged Jesus to come into my heart. And I asked him to forgive my sins. I had an awareness of my sin nature at 6 years old, 7 years old. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So have you always lived for the Lord? Did you ever go through a time of doubt or a time of what we might call rebellion or walking away from the Lord?
I don't think any of those things. I think, we all have moments of doubt or, going to do it my way. But I definitely think my college years, I went to Ohio State, had a blast, love the university. But I kind of did my own thing, but I was never away from the Lord. I just wasn't with the Lord. I wasn't going to church on Sundays, and I wasn't reading my Bible. I would wake up, though, praying. I think the Lord was like, you're just a little too out of it right now to pray for yourself, so I'll do it for you. And I feel like I was always aware of him and always, I think in many ways, talking to him. I just wasn't advancing my relationship with him. I was aware, I was out drinking and partying. I was a member of a sorority. I was doing that stuff, but I was not really over the top. I had those, I just feel like the Holy Spirit constricted me in many ways. And I never went over the rail, never did drugs. It just wasn't in my nature to do it, I think. So, and then when I graduated, I said, okay, I'm done fooling around. I've done my thing. And I remember on a bus, I was riding a city bus because when I first went up to school, I lived with my grandparents. And so I would take the bus into town, into the university. When I was my first quarter, I was taking classes. And I can, Carol, remember driving by one night. I had worked at the McDonald's in the student union. And we drove by this place called Papa Joe's. And it had a big plate glass window in the front. And there were all the kids on the dance floor. And I remember I yearned for that. I wanted to do that. I wanted to be on that dance floor. I wanted to have a couple of brewskis and laugh with my friends and do all of those things. And so that's where I went. And, after about 2.5 years in, I thought, okay, this is not, where's this going?
Yeah.
And when I graduated, I said, okay, I'm in. I'm all in. I'm yours. And he said, okay, let's take a bath. Let's get you cleaned up. So he did.
Oh, that glorious bath.
That glorious bath. Boy, it's tough. He's got a little rough scrubber. But, I really needed it because it was more than, he wasn't like, okay, Rachel, I just want you to live a godly life. I want you to do the right things. He was getting at that yearning that said, ooh, that looks good over there. But yeah, God was after that yearning. Let's go for that. Let's go for that piece of your flesh. And let's get that on my team. So,
yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how the Lord is always after our hearts. Because when he goes after our hearts, then actions and attitudes and thought patterns follow. I love that he was after Rachel's heart because he had a plan for your life.
Yes.
So when did you meet your husband? Tell us that journey. Because listen, you tell a great love story in your books. So let's make it personal. Tell us your love story.
People tell me when they hear a little bit of our story, they'll go, you should write that. And I'm like, I don't think it's believable. I can't do it. I don't think I could write my own story. I guess bits and pieces of your own personal love story or elements of your marriage or elements of your spouse come into a story. But after I graduated, I graduated in 85, was home in Tallahassee. My parents lived in Tallahassee at the time, kind of knocked around Tallahassee for a year. And one day I was driving down the road. I was working this job that was, going nowhere. And I said, Lord, you've got to put me where you want me. I've done everything I know to do to get a job. Put me where you want me. That night, a friend of mine from junior college called and he said, hey, I got this job in Melbourne, Florida. Are you interested? And it involved travel, which I wanted to travel, which I learned my lesson on that one as well. So anyway, I ended up a job at Melbourne, Florida. I'm teaching computers to newspaper production staff. So I was a journalism major, so I knew the language, I knew the lingo, I knew about newspapers, I knew about production. So while I originally wanted to be a writer, God stuck me in the business world first. And while I was there and I was on the road 70% of the time, so I was always gone, I started going to a church, and that's where I met Tony. He was the youth and singles pastor. He was the single youth and singles pastor. I was telling somebody yesterday, I saw his name on the bulletin, like Tony Hauck, Hauck, and I thought, what kind of name is that? And the Lord was like, it's going to be your name. Anyway, because I was gone so much, I didn't, it took a while for us to meet, and I started going to the singles meeting. And originally we started out interested in each other. We were both 27 going on 28, and you're looking for, a spouse. Yeah. And then the Lord just kind of pulled him back. He pursued me, and then boom, the Lord just changed his heart toward me as far as romance was concerned. So we were just friends for 3 years. The Lord, unfortunately, did not change my heart. So I'm in this relationship with this guy. He's my best friend, where I'm in love with him. And he's just kind of like, well, one day when we meet our real spouses, we'll probably be couple friends. Or we both trusted each other in the Lord. And I would say, well, what's the Lord telling you? And he would say, well, the Lord said to be friends. What's he telling you? And I'm like, well, if you're asking, I'm going to tell you. He's told me we were going to get married after our first date, Carol. And I was like, excuse me, what? I'm going to marry this guy? First of all, I don't know if I like him that much. And two, I'm not going to be the girl at church who thinks she's going to marry the single pastor. Sorry, not going to do it. But he just kept us in this relationship. We were so meshed together, and he built it on a friendship. And finally, one day the Lord finally said to him, and he used a friend of ours kind of in conjunction with just speaking to his heart, saying, Rachel's the one. And he still did not have romantic feelings for me. So I went out of town on vacation, and the Lord had told him something was going to happen on a certain day. I don't know why he felt that, but just in prayer. And I was out of town that day. And I remember I said, well, we're going to come back the next day, because I was traveling with a friend and her children. And he goes, don't you want to come back on the 10th? And I was like, nah, it's too much. We'll be back on the 11th, and the church was having a church picnic. I'll just swing by after I drop off Carol and the kids. And so that's what I did. And he was carrying trash out to the dumpster. And I got out of my car and I said, hey, I waved at him, and he turned and looked at me, and boom, instantly fell in love. Just instantly fell in love. God just, his heart. Yeah. And now I got a guy who's my friend, who's been my friend with nothing happening, sitting next to me, touching me, wanted to kiss me. I'm like, whoa, who's this guy? Back up, buddy. Like, it was just a real, it was, for me, I was the turtle. He all of a sudden was the hare, boom. And so we got engaged a few months later and married 5 months after that. So, but it was the friendship.
And so how long have you been married now, Rachel?
We've been married 32 years.
Wow.
So we've known each other for 36. Yeah. So we've been in a relationship for
And has he been in the ministry all those years?
Yes, he has. He's the senior pastor now. Yeah. I laugh. I say they finally made him senior pastor. He was the last man standing. Everybody else retired or moved away. But yeah, he's been at the same church, same non-denominational independent church for 40 years, coming up on 40 years.
Wow.
I think 38 years.
Well, listen, tell him thank you for his faithfulness. Make sure you tell him that
I will. He will appreciate that.
Thank him. Yeah, for being faithful to the call of God. So you've been a pastor's wife, and you've been writing these best-selling, award-winning Christian fiction books. So let's do this, Rachel. We're going to get to your most current book that you've just written, because that's actually why we're talking today. But there's so much to talk about. But one of your sweet spots in writing has been about wedding dresses. What has been about this bride motif?
Yeah.
Why, how did the Lord lead you down that pathway? Because that's an interesting road to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love everything you said, and I so appreciate it. But it's been a rocky road. I mean, anybody in publishing knows. So my first books, I did some little what they call category romances, the 4 in a collection that came out every month, like a subscription with Heart Song. And then I did a chick lit with one of Harlequin's Christian imprints. And then I dropped into Thomas Nelson, who I loved working with them. And my agent said, why don't you write a redneck chick lit book? And I'm like, how do you do barefoot beer and babies in the Christian market, especially in the early 2000s? Like, it was very conservative. We've loosened the strings a little bit, but it was super conservative. Anyway, I wrote about a country singer, and I did 2 books there set in Nashville, and they more or less bombed. They had Nash Vegas in the title, and if you didn't live in Nashville, you had no idea what Nash Vegas was. It's a nickname for the city. But they're cute, good. I really enjoyed them. I thought they were good books. But in the midst of that, then they asked me to write with country singer Sarah Evans. And so I did 3 books with Sarah Evans. And I had written a series of books that did better in the South Carolina Low Country. So chick lit had faded. And now, so I had to switch to romance, which is a little bit of a different voice. And so it's like, as soon as I got there, like the road closed. And so one day I was moving on from writing with Sarah, and I was up to another contract, and they were going to offer me. So I was really on my way out the door. But because I wrote with Sarah, they were going to offer me a one-book contract, which I didn't know at the time. I found out later. And, with no more money than I had been getting, it was a kind of a thank you contract. And that's going to make me tear up. And I had gone to visit some friends outside of Nashville, and one of them was talking about her daughter getting married. And when she put on the dress, you just knew. And as soon as she said that, Carol, I was gone. And all three of them were in business. One of them was Kim Cash-Tate, who's now doing a great job in independent fiction, and she's doing a podcast called Cling. She's married to the president of LSU, and so she's a lawyer and a writer. She's fabulous. And then two other people, one had been the president of Thomas Nelson, and one was the vice president of gifts and marketing. So there are all these business women. So all of a sudden they start talking business, and I'm off in writer yah land. And I had this vision of a wedding dress, and I thought, what if there's one dress that 4 women wear over the course of like 100 years? And I just started playing out the story. And in the midst of their business, legal, marketing conversation, I go, hey guys, what about a book with a wedding dress that the 4 different women wear over 100 years? And they were like, yeah. And then late, because they were in a totally different zone. And then later they came back to me and they go, no, that's a good idea. You should do it. And I called my editor. She got chills. And so that's what I dove into, the wedding dress. And it just really was an idea from the Lord. And then as I was writing it, the Lord said to me, it's a symbol for the gospel. Or I just had this understanding that the dress is a symbol for the gospel. It fits everyone who tries it on. It's always in style. It never wears out. And it's always beautiful. And so that became the story. And it just blew up and was... Wow. It was a good one-book deal, and I'm proud for the publisher. Good for them. I mean, they're in a business. They're a business. Books have to sell to be in business, and so I was just really grateful to the Lord to breathe on that story. And 3 years later, it went on sale, and by now they're owned by HarperCollins. Thomas Nelson is owned by HarperCollins, and they put 100 books on sale, and it outsold all of them. And so the president of HarperCollins is calling Thomas Nelson going, hey, what's with this book down here? And his staff is going, well, it's a book from our Christian romance division. And he's like, well, does it have one of those bonnet on it? He wondered if it was an Amish book, because they were blowing up still in 2015. And and then they put it on sale the beginning of, for Valentine's Day in 2016. And Amazon put it on the front page. And it was the second book in of their monthly deals. And it just, Barnes & Noble got on board. All the other retail venues got on board. And once we hit the New York Times, then Thomas Nelson started making out their connections and started supporting it. And so we sat 9 weeks on the New York Times in the spring of 2016. And then they asked me, and then by then they had already asked me to do more wedding books. And so we did Wedding Chapel and we did a wedding shop. And so that's how, and then I independently wrote The Wedding Dress Christmas to kind of tie that in. And I moved it all to a small town in Tennessee called Harts Bend, Tennessee, outside of Nashville. So The Wedding Dress is set in Birmingham. But, I was in my mind one and done. It's split time. It's got 1912 and 2012. I did a lot of Birmingham research. And so I felt like, okay, it's done. A little encapsulated story. That's kind of how my brain works. What's next? And they were like, no, more of this. And so the Wedding Chapel and the Wedding Shop did well. And I was able to bring the dress back into the story for the Wedding Shop. And just, the whole point of the dress is that it moves on to the next girl, to that God has for it. And that's the gospel. It moves on.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the beginning.
Well, one thing I couldn't wait to tell you, Rachel, is that one of my dearest friends, her daughter is going to get engaged on Saturday, and she doesn't know it. And they live in Alabama, the state of Alabama, but this is going to drop after the engagement happens. So for my gift, I'm going to take her your book about the 4 generations who wore the same dress.
Good. That's so good.
But it's just, as you said, symbolic of what the gospel can do in a family, in a group of people.
Well, and
so thank you for sharing that. That's incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we'll get back to my conversation with Rachel Hauck in just a minute, but I want to take time to say thank you. Consider this your personal thank you note from my heart to yours. Thank you for listening to this podcast and many other streams in which you could be waiting. So I want to tell you, I appreciate you. I never take it for granted that you take time out of your busy week to listen to the Significant Women podcast. As a matter of fact, I'm so appreciative that I would love to hear from you. When you send me an email, carol@carolmcleodministries.com, I'm the only one who reads it. And I do read every single email that comes in. You can send a prayer request. You can send a word of thanksgiving or gratitude. Hey, you can suggest guests for my podcast. Just email me at carol@carolmcleodministries.com. I can't wait to hear from you because you know what? You're one of my favorites too. Now let's get back to my conversation with Rachel Hauck. Well, before we're done here, we have to talk about your new book, Rachel, which is titled Meet Me at the Starlight, which is another travel through time book. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. Yeah, so it's another sort of travel through time book. So tell us about the characters, the plot, and really what lesson you want to teach through this book, Meet Me at the Starlight.
Yeah, this is not quite a straight up split time, but it does have a character set in the 30s, and we kind of see her again in the 40s and the 60s, and then the contemporary story is the 80s. And so, of course, she's an old woman in the 80s, and her name is Tuesday, and she owns this skating rink called the Starlight, and it's set in a fictional town called Sea Blue Beach in North Florida, kind of in the Destin area, if anybody's been up into the panhandle of Florida. It's beautiful. And so I kind of took all of that area and created my own little town. And she's in charge of this skating rink, which was really just symbolic of the heart of the community. It's where everybody went. And when the hurricanes came, and the cool part about the town, it was founded by a prince based on a family that I've written in the True Blue Royal series. And I thought, you know what? Why don't we just, put it all in the story? We got royals, we got Hollywood stars, we got a supermodel. So, and then the 80s storyline is Harlow Hayes, who's a 1980s supermodel. And in case anybody doesn't know what a supermodel is, they were just like the famous women on covers of magazines, and they made a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Cindy Crawford is kind of the technical first supermodel, but there were some women in the 30s and 40s who were supermodels because they might grace 15 magazine covers in a month. They weren't making the money that modern models make, but they were just on all the covers. And so she has a broken heart, and she eats her way out of a career. It was kind of like her rebellion. Okay, you broke my heart. This is the thing that I wanted, to get married and have a family, and you broke my heart. So, and kind of she just couldn't stop eating. And then Matt Knight is Tuesday's grandson, and he went to USC to play football. And he was so good looking, and football didn't pan out. So he ended up, as Granny would say, in the pictures. So he's a kind of a little bit of a Brat Packer A-list actor in the 80s. And so they all end up in Sea Blue Beach. And he comes back to help his grandmother save the Starlight, which I never thought I set out to write, save the Starlight kind of story, or save the skating rink, or save the town theater. But that's what it ended up being. And then Harlow goes down there to kind of save herself. She is not working. She's living in a closet of a friend of hers. And she finally just reckons that I've got to do something with my life. And her ex-fiance generously had given her this home in Sea Blue Beach. And so she goes down, and it's how she connects with Matt, how she connects with Tuesday. She ends up working at the skating rink. So this supermodel going from, $10,000 a day to $350 an hour working at a skating rink. But it's about overcoming. And Tuesday's an incredibly strong woman. Her husband's involved in the gangs. He's a gangster. He's involved in the mobs. And she stands up to him. And she almost took over the story. But their lives are impacted by war. Lives are impacted by the actions of others. And it's how do you overcome? And how Tuesday just loved through it all. I mean, she had every right to be bitter and angry, but she chose to love. And then kind of have a supernatural character that I always I always try to think, if Jesus could walk into the scene right now, what would it look like, or how would we respond? So I always have a little bit of a supernatural character to represent that part of him, because I love for the readers to encounter Jesus in a story, not me or not so much church, but can they encounter the Lord, and how can I show his kindness, his forgiveness, his love, his hope? And so he's Emmanuel, God with us, is that his part of the story. And he's connected to the rink. He's connected to the prince who built the town and the rink. So it's just really about enduring and loving yourself. Harlow had to learn to love herself. Why was she doing what she was doing? And Matt had to forgive himself for something that he had done in the past, and he felt like he had really harmed somebody. And Tuesday just had to reckon that Emmanuel had always been in charge of her life, even though she had great loss. So, and there's some fun 80s references, some fun music references. Got a little Valley Girl speak in there, like totally tubular.
And do they all have big hair too? Just like the
Oh yeah, she had big hair, and she has Jane Fonda workout tape, and she's wearing spandex.
Yeah. Oh, love it. Oh, I can't wait. Well, the name of the book is Meet Me at the Starlight. And I love how you say it's really about a young woman learning to love herself. And don't we all need to do that?
Absolutely.
And Tuesday's a great role model for her, because life is hard, isn't it? Rachel, life is not perfect.
Life is hard.
Yeah.
There's some really fun scenes. I was going to say real quick, there's some fun scenes with Tuesday.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tuesday took the rink to herself on Tuesday night after it closed. And even though she was an old woman, she would roller skate by herself to the music that she loved. And I feel like that's really the secret place, that we have to get to the secret place to endure the hardships, to endure the things that knock us sideways and disappoint us and let us down. So, yeah.
No, I'm glad you shared that, because that's a great segue to what I wanted to ask you next and really close with. So I'm going to quote you, Rachel, from your website.
Okay.
You say that dreams are tough. Dreams are hard to define. Dreams are hard to achieve. They're time consuming, yet dreams are worth our time and our effort. So, Rachel, I want you to minister right now to the woman whose dreams have not come true, to the woman who's just really in the swamp of disappointment. Would you encourage her today?
Yeah. Can I say something? You want me to pray? Or just say something?
Pray at the end, but
okay.
Say something, minister to them. Encourage them in the Lord.
Okay. Yeah. Definitely. I as you were even quoting me, I thought, gee whiz, I need to add to that. You know what I've come to learn, and I think you probably have too, Carol, is 3 years ago, I had this incredible writing opportunity. And right in the middle of that, I got hit just out of the blue with anxiety. In fact, I felt it hit and I knew what was happening, and I stood and resisted it, but it found a weakness in me, and the Lord just allowed me to walk through about 6 or 7 months. It would hit like once a week, and I would just be on my knees before the Lord, weeping, worship music, and going for walks every evening and just bringing it all to God. And I thought, okay, this has got about a 3-month process. When we make our decision, when it happens, and then it'll be over one way or the other. Whew, like I was worried about and I was like, what if I can't do it? What if I fail? And I have to pay back all this money? I was just in that swirl. You guys know what I'm talking about. And then when we came to our final conclusion, and we decided neither one of us were in for the project, that I thought, okay, it's over. But it wasn't. Yeah. The next thing that came up, and all good things, moving on to another contract with my current publisher, I felt that, what if I fail? What if I let him down? What if I can't do it? And it was just all of those little tiny things that you don't realize, those little lies, those little fears. And so finally I just said, you know what? You're going to hit me. I'm going to hit you back. And I downloaded a counter on my phone, and it has pages, and I put a scripture on the top of every page. And I would quote those as many times, and I would count how many times I quoted them. And I quoted Philippians 4, 6, and 7 118 times in 2 weeks. But I stayed in that
Wow.
vein for intensely for 6 months. And it was funny
Mhm.
because I could feel it start to hit me, which is so weird. And then and I
Mhm.
probably cried every day, but good tears. And the Lord was just
Mm.
more cleaning, more scrubbing. And so
Mhm.
at that point, I'm like, I don't care if I write a book again. And this is my dream. This
Yeah.
is my job. This is part of our
Mhm.
household budget, what I earn as a
Mhm.
writer. And I just was like, I'm done. I don't care, because God, I can't let the dream be in front of you. And and encountering
Mm.
him, he encountered me every week. Every time he encountered me, there was not a time where I went to him and started, and I could feel it coming, feeling the anxiety hitting. And there was not a time where he did not meet me, not a time. And
Mm.
just bringing stuff up, little tiny resentments, little areas where I didn't trust him, where overall, yeah, I trust God. But there's that deep down where, I don't know there what he might do. He might leave me alone there. And so we were just
Yeah.
getting at all of that basement stuff, all the muck in the corners.
Mm.
And so I would say to anyone who's sometimes our dreams sadly are unrealistic. I think some of my dreams about my writing and where my career is going to go just
Mm.
were unrealistic. I'm a
Yeah.
dream big kind of girl.
Mhm.
But have I had success? Yes. Have I made a living? Yes. Have I reached people with the story, with the written word? Yes. So God, what
Mhm.
is your dream for me? And
Yeah.
I think the number one dream that I think we should all have is, how much can we know God? Because there's so much
Mm.
grace to knowing him. And
Mhm.
so I know for some, maybe you're starting out in art or in a business, or you want to go back to school, you want to advance your career, you maybe you want to do something with your family, and you feel like God's put something on your heart. And to that I say, if it's from him, it'll happen. You can
Yeah.
go to school, you can train, you can study the craft. When I was at a point where I was working full time, I was managing the road warriors that go out and install the systems. I was working 50 hours a week. I was leading worship. I was in youth ministry. I mean, I was, to the wall, busy. And I said, Lord, I can't pursue writing because I'm always thinking about it. So I sit down to pray and I'm thinking about stories. What am I going to write? How am I going to do this? And
Mhm.
I said, if you don't have this for
Mhm.
me, take it away, because I don't want to account for wasted time. And within 3 months,
Mhm.
somebody
Mhm.
called me and said, hey, I've talked to my editor and my publisher, and if we come up with a good project, they'll buy it. And then those are those first little heart songs that I wrote with somebody else. And
Yeah.
so I think it really, and just seeing how the Lord, as we wait on him, because this I know for sure, he will not let anything get in front of your heart toward him. And sometimes I
Yeah.
think that's the frustration that we feel, because people will
Yeah.
say, well, what did you learn with this book, Rachel? I'm like, what I learn with every book, to come up leaning on my beloved, Song of Solomon, chapter 8. I come up
Mhm.
leaning on my beloved. If this journey
Mhm.
isn't
Mhm.
drawing me into him and closer to him, and I'm realizing more and more his love, his grace, his character, how good he is, how kind he is, then I've missed the point. The point isn't for Rachel Hauck to be, number one New York Times bestseller. The point is to draw me
Mhm.
into him and into the things that
Yeah.
remain. And so,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
dreams are great. We have to have dreams. But to me, the dream can never get in front of knowing him. The number one dream is to know
Yes.
him. I mean, if we learn anything from Solomon, he said, in Ecclesiastes, I've done it all,
Yeah.
but he's the main thing. There's all of
Yeah.
this is for him. And I think,
Mhm.
and it may feel kind of, I don't want it to feel kind of pious and, oh, that's the religious churchy thing. I'm not speaking from that. I am not that. The last thing on my resume is always pastor's wife. I don't even hardly think about it. I think about, I'm a writer, I'm a
Yeah.
worship leader, and I do those things because I'm called, not because of who I'm married to. And then there
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
elements, of course, being married to him that come into play. But I'm saying it
Yeah.
because it's true, that Jesus should be our one magnificent obsession. So for your dreams,
Yes.
put them all before the Lord. And here's the thing: if you lay them down and you're feeling like, but he won't pick them up again, then start going to him with, I don't trust you. Help me trust you. I think we just bring all of that to
Yes.
him. And that's how I survived.
Yeah.
The anxiety, I just began to walk out of it. And finally, the Lord said to me, Rachel, read
Uh-huh.
Psalm 139. And I just sat in Psalm 139. I'm back in it. Psalm 139. I just stayed in it. Because God, what can I glean from you out of your word? And it was his word.
Yeah.
He sent his word and healed them. It was his word that healed me. And so it was his word that caused me to overcome. And so I just know for us as women, we wear so many hats, but let your main hat be that you're in the secret place and that you're trusting the Lord and that you're going to him with everything,
Yes. Yes. Oh, I love it. Thank you. I'll never forget that you said, don't let the dream become bigger than your relationship with the Lord. Don't let your dream become your idol. That's misplaced priority.
Yeah.
So we focus on him, on knowing him. Paul said that I could know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings.
Yeah. And the suffering is often where we actually the suffering of that anxiety was where I connected in a deeper way that I'm still walking in. Now I'm hungry to go, what's next? And I'm like, but please not that, can we go a different route this time? But I want to say this too. Don't feel that because you feel the Lord has told you to do something, then walk in partnership with him. He hasn't given you something to do other than be with him, spending time. The discipline of prayer and being in the word is real. We have to do that. There's just no other way. Like I can walk into the gym, but if I don't get on the machines and lift the weights, I don't build muscle. So we have to do those disciplines, but we don't have to run around trying to open the doors to do the thing he's called us to do. I had no idea I was called to lead worship. I was on the worship team. I knew that something happened when I worshiped, both in myself and among those I was worshiping, but I had no vision of being a worship leader. And then I was on a mission trip with the kids. We were up in New York, actually, and I had this overwhelming desire to lead worship, just like, get off the stage, let me do it. I was like, I don't even know how to play anything, but let me lead worship. And that was August, and I went home and I said, Lord, there is no way. Our senior pastor was our worship leader. He was amazing. What was I going to do? I wasn't even on the worship team at the time. So it was August. I went home. I left it. I didn't do anything with it. March, our senior pastor comes to us and says he's moving to join another ministry. We knew it was God. They had to pick worship leaders, and I was tapped. And so 24 years later, I'm the main worship leader. Working on some others being the main worship leader. So I've been doing it for 24 years. But it came out of, I was nowhere. I was just in the secret place. And so that's what I mean for your dream. God will do it. You don't have to kick down doors. You're not disobedient if you're not, physically doing something, if there's nothing to do, so he'll open the doors.
The psalmist said, delight yourself in the Lord.
Yes.
Like that's our goal, to delight in him, to find all our joy in him.
Yes.
And then there's a result of that he'll give you the desires of your heart. But our job is to delight in him. That's our assignment. As long as we're this side of heaven's glory, is to delight ourselves in him.
How fun is
Rachel,
that?
would you pray? Oh, it's the best.
I know,
There's
right?
nothing like it. It's better than chocolate, right?
That's right. It's like, what's your job? Delight in me. Oh, okay. But that's hard for our flesh. But I will pray for that.
Yeah.
Oh, Father.
It's the most delightful job. It is.
It is the most.
Well, Rachel.
And hard.
Would you... And hard, yeah. And it's an act of our will. It's a choice that we have to make every day. We choose to delight.
Can I just tag on to that?
Would you pray?
Yes.
Go ahead. Go for it, girl.
I just want to tag on this because a friend of mine said this once. It was so brilliant. He was talking to someone who's like, it's just so hard. I want to delight in the Lord. I want to be with him. It's just so hard. And he goes, because you're sitting down with someone with whom you have nothing in common yet. Right? It's our flesh has to be transformed. Paul says we're transformed by renewing our mind. So the more we get with him, the more we're transformed, the more we have in common with him, the easier and more delightful it becomes. So Father, I just thank you that you delight in us and that you've called us to delight in you. And so I pray for us, everyone listening, all the women, even men, Lord, that they would be called into a place of delighting in you. David writes in Psalm 139, I was formed in the secret place. And we know he's referencing that he was knit together in secret in his mother's womb. But God, I believe even now you form us in that secret place. Jesus, you talk about going into the secret place, going into that room, shutting the door, and your Father who hears in secret will repay you openly. And so, God, we know that you want us to know you, and you want to be in a relationship with us. So I ask that you enable us to be in the secret place. Teach us to delight in you. Would you release a grace to delight in you, to come to that prayer place, that secret place? And Father, I pray for women who are working on a transition or working on the thing that you've put before them to do, or the dream that they have. I know many women are out there probably longing to write or do something with music or singing, maybe with art. Maybe they want to go to business school, whatever it is, open a business. I pray, Father, that you would make a way for them. The scripture says in Isaiah that you make the rough places smooth. You crash through bronze doors and iron bars. So will you make a roadway in the wilderness for them and a river in the desert? And I ask for a release of grace to trust you like they've never trusted you before. And even now, if you're listening, just release that thing to the Lord. You don't have to bear the burden. His burden is easy. His yoke is light. I release it to you, Lord. I release my career to you. And I just thank you that you hear our prayers and that you are ever, ever near to us. In Jesus' name, amen and amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Rachel. I've loved talking to you today. The name of your new book is Meet Me at the Starlight, and it's going to be such a sweet read for all my listeners. So make sure that you buy a copy for you and a friend, for sure. Bless you, Rachel. I can't wait to talk to you again when your next book comes out. Okay. Well, if you've been encouraged by today's episode, and I can't imagine that you were not, would you take just a minute, like not even a minute, 30 seconds to leave a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast on? Maybe it's YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or maybe it's on our app. Wherever you listen to this podcast, just take 30 more seconds and say, hey, I love your podcast, and this is the reason why. Just click on some stars. We appreciate it so much. And I hope you do know that I do have an app for your smartphone. You can just go to the App Store on your phone, do a search for Carol McLeod Ministries. It'll pop right up and it's free. Our app is a great way to stay in touch with the ministry. You'll know where I'm speaking. You'll know when a new episode of the podcast drops. You can order a book, leave a prayer request, join a Bible study. It's all right there on the app. Now, I really want you to connect with Rachel Hauck. You can connect with her on her website, which is rachelhauck.com, or you can find her on social media. Rachel, Rachel, and Hauck, Hauck. I know that she would love to hear from you. Don't forget to grab a copy of her latest book, Meet Me at the Starlight. I know it's going to be a great read for you in any season of the calendar year. Well, before we end this episode, I thought it would be appropriate if we just talked about worship for a minute or two. Rachel and I touched on this during our conversation, but I want to remind you that worship is a weapon. When you don't know what to do, you can sing. When you can't read your Bible because the tears in your eyes, lift up your voice in a song of praise to your eternal and compassionate Father. You know, I often think about David when I think about worship, because he was a man in the Bible who often dealt with discouragement, with melancholy, and even depression. David was also a man who cried out to God in the middle of his pain. David did not allow emotional pain to still his voice, to pause his song of praise, to mute his worship to the King of all kings and the Lord of all lords. David did not allow the malaise of his soul to separate him from the Father, but he used it to propel him into God's presence where there is always fullness of joy. Did you know that David had a son who died? He did. He had a baby boy who died. Certainly sending a little precious life to heaven is reason enough for a man to throw himself into the depths of depression. I can't imagine a pain more horrific or more paralyzing than the pain of losing a child. Can you? If anyone deserved to crawl into the black, bottomless pit of depression and never come out again, it was David. But listen, what you deserve to do and what you should do are two different things entirely. Let me say that again. What you deserve to do and what you should do are two different things entirely. This is what the Bible says about David at the worst moment of his life. So David rose from the ground, washed, anointed himself, changed his clothes, and he came into the house of the Lord, and he worshiped there. Then he came into his own house, and when he requested, they set before him food, and he ate. You know, it's breathtaking to me, as I said, at the very worst moment of David's life, that he chose to change his clothes and to worship. You know what he did? David took off the garment of mourning and he put on his garment of praise. He decided in this moment, the most purposeful, healthy choice I can make is to worship the Lord. My friend, you can make this choice too. You can lift your hands in the air and sing a rare song of praise to the Lord, even when the tears are rolling down your cheeks. You can do it. I have done it times without number, and you can do it too. Put on your garment of praise and remember that you're significant because you are a son, you are a daughter of the Most High God who loves you with an everlasting love. I can't wait to see you next week on the Significant Women Podcast.